Good afternoon. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and on behalf of Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc., I warmly welcome you to tonight's America at a Crossroads virtual town hall program. Tonight, we are excited to present the esteemed U.S. House Majority Whip, James Clyburn, in conversation with KPPC's Larry Mantle. Our judge leadership team includes former Congressman Mel Levine, David Lehrer, former LA County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky, Caroline Kelly, and Rabbi Ken Chazen. You saw our list of co-sponsors on the screen a moment ago, and we're grateful to all of our sponsors. For 84 consecutive weeks, we have presented these weekly virtual town halls. Our mission is to inspire our listeners to stay informed, engaged, strong, and motivated as we all remain committed to protecting the foundations of our democracy and its institutions. Often following a particularly politically difficult week or program, I get many emails asking what members of our audience can do to participate in this fight for our democracy. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan collaboration, and we have no staff, but we will be updating our list of other nonpartisan nonprofits who focus on issues relating to combating voter suppression and working on preserving our democracy and its institutions. If you have one of those organizations to recommend to us, just send me an email and we'll include it. Once we vet it, we will include it in our list. Stand by for those referrals, which we will send out via email, and we'll also post it on our websites. Full unedited recordings of all of our programs can be found on our YouTube channel and on our websites. And we always provide an easy to use link for past programs in all of our emails. Next week, in celebration of Thanksgiving, we will be dark. I think it may be the very first week that we've actually skipped a program in the last 84 weeks. But on the Wednesday following Thanksgiving, we'll welcome Max Boot, who will analyze the likelihood and consequences of another Trump presidential term. Then the following week, we'll hear from the brilliant polymath, Jared Diamond, who wrote several best-selling, critically acclaimed books, including his seminal work, Guns, Germs, and Steel, for which he was awarded the Pulitzer. Well, every week is the right week to express gratitude to our outstanding speakers, our sensational moderators, and our incredibly loyal audience. Thanksgiving is time for an extra special opportunity to thank you for everything that you do to make this program a success. Clearly, without our amazing array of extraordinary speakers and moderators, there would be no America at a Crossroads. And of course, the same is true for our audience. So many thanks to all three groupings. I also want to extend a special thank you to my trusted colleague, David Lehrer. We work together on a daily basis to develop and implement each of our programs. He is a joy to work with, and I am very grateful for that partnership. And to Zev and Mel, each of whom is wholly invested in this series and who help us each week to ensure that we are covering the most compelling topics with the most qualified, outstanding speakers. So thanks to all of you. And speaking of David Lehrer, here he is to share a bit more about others of our upcoming programs. David?
Thank you, Janice. I share your gratitude for this fruitful partnership. I couldn't have hoped for a more able, hardworking, bright, and astute partner than you. I give thanks every Wednesday evening for all you do, even if I don't verbalize it. Tonight, we will offer an inside look at what is happening in Washington from a man very close to the top, the whip of the U.S. House of Representatives, the Majority Whip. Next month, we will host the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who will discuss the challenges of navigating extreme partisanship as the governor of a deeply divided state. Given the militias that have surfaced there and the electoral shenanigans that voting officials were subjected to last year, she has interesting, chilling, and instructive experiences to recount as we contemplate the upcoming elections. The following week, December 22nd, we have a new program to announce. We'll be joined by three experts on generational change, Morley Winograd, Mike Hayes, and Yael Bromberg. They will discuss America's youngest voters, catalysts for change and targets of suppression. The tens of millions of millennials and the following generation, the plurals, will be critically important in elections for decades to come. We'll learn where they are headed and why. Before turning the program over to my colleague, Mel Levine, I want to wish, as Janice did, all of you a happy and meaningful Thanksgiving. For all that needs repair in our nation and the world, we remained a blessed nation. Our moderator has been a friend for over 40 years. From legislative battles in Sacramento in the 70s, he's a former state assemblyman and a former congressman, a member of the JUDJ Executive Committee, and an invaluable contributor to the success of this series, former Congressman Mel Levine. Mel?
Thank you, David. I'm just going to join you and Janice in telling our audience what a pleasure it is to work with both of you, along with our very dear friend Zev Yaroslavsky, who's 1/4 of this quadrangle. It gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker, United States House Majority Whip, James E. Clyburn, who is a proud South Carolinian and is the third-ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives. And Whip Clyburn is hardly a newcomer to his critical leadership roles. He has been in senior House leadership for the past 15 years, as he also served as whip between 2007 and 2011, and as assistant Democratic leader between 2011 and 2019. These leadership positions would come as no surprise to anyone familiar with his trajectory in the House. When he arrived as a freshman in 1993, he was immediately elected co-president of his freshman class. He subsequently served as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and as chair of the House Democratic Caucus. And his leadership reaches well beyond Congress. Representative Clyburn's endorsement of Joe Biden was the most significant single action of the 2020 Democratic primary elections. His pivotal endorsement in 2020 transformed the Democratic primary process and very quickly led to President Biden securing the nomination of his party. Whip Clyburn's leadership in that instance literally transformed the Democratic primary process virtually overnight from a chaos resembling a circular firing squad into, on the other hand, unifying the entire party behind the candidacy of Joe Biden, enabling the Democratic Party to coalesce around Joe's candidacy and eventually elect him as president. I'm keenly aware of the esteem with which Whip Clyburn is held by his colleagues. I must say that while I don't miss much about Congress these days, one of my very few regrets is that I never had the opportunity to serve with Representative Clyburn. He arrived just as I left. He is an invaluable leader, and America is fortunate that he has chosen to be a public servant at a critical time in America's history. Welcome, Whip Clyburn. We are honored that you have agreed to spend the next hour with us. But before turning to you, which Larry will do, I want to briefly introduce our wonderful moderator, Larry Mantle. Larry is one of our most frequent moderators, a delight to work with, a consummate professional, and the host of KPCC's Air Talk since 1985. Larry can discuss movies, world events, sports, and political philosophy with equal facility, and he does it every day. He is the recipient of numerous awards, including Journalist of the Year, awarded to him by his colleagues. Larry, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mel. I really appreciate those kind words. And it's just a pleasure to be part of these very special programs. I learned so much from each of the experiences moderating them. My thanks as well to Janice, to Zev, to David. It's just been a real pleasure to work with you and to have the honor to interview such remarkable guests as America at the Crossroads brings into your home every single week. And of course, this week, it is the House Majority Whip, Congressman Clyburn, who joins us. Congressman, thank you so much for being a part of tonight's program. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thanks to all who have tuned in this evening. I look forward to hopefully a fruitful discussion.
I expect you'll have much of interest to say, but let's begin with what happened today in the House of Representatives. The House voting to censure Arizona Republican Paul Gosar over his posting of a photoshopped anime of him killing Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The vote today in the House also stripping him of his 2 committee assignments. And you said that you actually would have preferred an expulsion vote to be held. Share with us your thoughts about what took place.
Well, thank you. You know, my preference for that had to do with his siblings. Back in 2018, I first became aware of Mr. Gosar and his impact on some of the electorate. When his sister and I believe two brothers, I know one, took to the airwaves to challenge his reelection and asked people not to vote for him. They said at that time, and they continue to say it today. In fact, I saw his brother just after the vote. He said, "This man is dangerous. He's my brother, but he's dangerous." And so they called for him to be expelled. And so I just associated myself with his family in that regard. But as House Majority Whip, I tend to support the consensus that's built within our caucus. And the consensus among us was to do the censure, remove him from committees, and call upon the leader of the Republican conference to do what the family asked. As a Republican, Mr. McCarthy has a role to play in all of this. And I would think that expulsion is something that he should take a hard look at.
Now, we're not privy to what took place in that GOP meeting where House members of the Republican caucus apparently met and talked this over. And apparently they were satisfied by the explanation that the congressman gave, that this was not at all to be taken literally. It was a device of art, essentially, was the argument that we heard from the congressman. So what is it about this for you that took this beyond something that was a kind of caricature into something that could pose a very real threat to members of Congress?
We're public servants, and we do business in the public. I think that if he were serious about that, he should have apologized to let's call it the recipient of his gesture, but he never did. And because so many people in the public, in and outside of his family, he should have apologized to the public. He didn't do anything in public except today when he spoke. He never apologized. He still held on to his position, which I think tells us who and what he really is. So for the Republican conference to say, what he said to us in private satisfied us. But what will satisfy the recipient? And Ms. Ocasio, she is not satisfied.
We are in a period where public officials are getting the kinds of threats that we have not been issued in the past. And we, of course, know that public officials have been threatened in the past. But from your perception as someone who was first elected to the House in 1993, in your years of service, has it become a more vulnerable position, perhaps more dangerous to be an elected official in America?
Yes, it has become much more dangerous. And I think that we have too many elected officials who are contributing to that atmosphere. Look, I'm from South Carolina. I know the history of South Carolina very well. I've studied all of my life, even taught some of it. And I can tell you, I remember from my studies, Preston Brooks, who caned Mr. Sumner, Senator Sumner, to near death on the floor of the House. Now, Preston Brooks was from Abbeville, South Carolina, so you can imagine. I've spent some time studying all the issues surrounding that, which had to do with the debate over slavery and whether or not we should hold on to it or get rid of it. So I know the history of this. Strom Thurmond is from South Carolina. He set the filibuster record that stands to this day over civil rights. I came to Congress in 1992. I got elected in 92, sworn in January of 93. for the last 5 years that I spent running a state agency in South Carolina, a state law enforcement officer was assigned to me for every day of those 5 years. When I left town for periods of time, a state law enforcement officer stayed in my house with my wife and children. So I know what it is to be subjected to these kinds of threats. And so I spoke out today because I think that Mr. McCarthy ought to belly up to the bar and do what is necessary to cleanse his conference of this kind of activity. But instead, he says nothing. And when he went to the well, he was accompanied by, look to me, 35 or 40 of his colleagues standing there with him, as if to say, we accept this censure with you, and you do not stand alone. This program is pretty aptly named, America is at the Crossroads.
Congressman, let's talk about the president and your party. The president with a major victory, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which had tremendous support among Americans, according to all the polls. But on the other side, the president, the chaotic withdrawal of Afghanistan, for which tremendous displeasure by Americans, and I think for many Americans a sense of embarrassment over that process and how it was handled and how it made the country look. As you look at President Biden on net successes versus setbacks, how do you see the administration performing to this point?
Well, I think he's on the plus side of that ledger, if we set it up that way. Yeah, Afghanistan was chaotic. I think that we should have gotten out of Afghanistan a long, long time ago. Over 20 years there. I thought we never should have gone in there. If my memory serves, I don't remember every vote I took, but I know how I feel about it. So I think I was opposed to us going to, Iraq. I understood. It posed a threat, though we didn't have all the information at the time. I think if I had all of the information that finally came out, I never would have voted for that as well. And so I think that the president came out against it when he was vice president, against our being there. And when he got to be president, he saw that as an opportunity to get out. And maybe, there's no question about it, could have been done better. But sometimes you do not do things as pretty as they should be done. But getting out is something that we should have done a long, long time ago.
But I think arguably it hurt him a great deal because President Biden ran on the platform, among other things, that he was going to restore a sense of order and cohesion to the White House, that after the chaos of the Trump years, that this was going to be essentially the adults back in charge and the people who know how to do things. And then he had tremendous public support for the withdrawal from Afghanistan, but it was done so poorly. Don't you think that undermined that sense of confidence that what maybe there was going to be, the kind of stability that he talked about, the kind of competency he talked about when running?
Well, it would seem to me that we have to give the president benefit for believing that the Afghanistans, the folks would, at least the soldiers, would fight for their freedom. They didn't. And I don't know if he should have had any understanding as to that being the case. I certainly thought they would fight, put up some fight, even if you don't win. When I think of my past and what I believed in, the late John Lewis and I met as 19-year-old college students. And we fought for what we believed in. We went to jail for what we believed in. And we didn't cave when opposition came. These people did not make any attempt as that I could see, to fight for their own freedoms. I gotta think that the president thought they would. And I think that the chaos came from the fact that they all melted away.
Congressman,
I'm sorry?
no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
If
Please
they
finish.
put up some kind of a fight, I think the whole process would have been different.
Congressman, I want to ask you about Republicans held the debt ceiling increase hostage to gum up the works. And the progressive wing of the Democratic Party held the very popular bipartisan infrastructure bill up in an effort to get past the $3.5 trillion social services bill that the president also has as a part of his agenda. And I'm interested in your critique. Obviously, I know you were upset about what Republicans did because of the risks involved with delaying raising the debt ceiling. But what about what some members of your party have done, tying the two bills together, when that could have been a very early, very clear victory for President Biden had it passed earlier?
Oh, there's no question that could have been a clear victory, but I understand the reticence on the part of a lot of the progressives as to whether or not the thing that they cared most about would get done. Now, you know, when you start talking about infrastructure issues, it's very easy for people to want to fix the roads and the bridges and create the water systems and deepen their ports and fix the rail lines. That, for all intents and purposes, focuses on things rather than people. And a lot of people in the progressive caucus wanted some attention put on people. And that's what Build Back Better is all about, taking care of children. The big part of that bill is to deal with those 12 states that refuse to expand Medicaid. And my state is one of them. Over 200,000 people in my state where the Republican-controlled legislature and the Republican governor refused to expand Medicaid so they could have health care. And that's true with 11 other states. That's in Build Back Better. And they were afraid that to agree to this bill, the infrastructure bill, they wanted some guarantee that you would give us the attention we need on Build Back Better. And that's what they were holding out for.
Do you think that was a good strategy?
Well, it was a strategy. You'd have to look back on it to tell whether or not it was good. I supported that. But I also supported, and I was the one, as I think you've heard, that initiated the process that broke the logjam. When I said to the moderates, it's time for you all to get beyond your comfort zone. I said to the progressives, it's time for you all to get beyond your comfort zones. I'm gonna give up some of my comfort. And I want the other side to give up some of their comfort, and let's find common ground. And we did, and we passed the bill. Now, a lot of people said we would have passed the bill earlier. If he had passed the bill earlier, he would have changed the outcome in New Jersey and Virginia. I don't know that I agree with that.
Okay.
I was in Virginia the weekend before the election. I was in New Jersey the weekend before that. I just came back from Texas, California, up at Michigan State on Monday of last week. And I can tell you that that vote did not have a lot to do with what's going on in the hearts and minds of people in this country.
Congressman, what is now the timeline for the Build Back Better legislation to be scored by the office, the Congressional Budget Office, and then for it to come back for a vote?
Well, the next 24 hours, we hope to get something. Now, you used the word score. Now, let's be sure. The compromise that was made and agreed to by both sides, Josh Gottenheimer speaking for the moderates, and her last name, Camilla, speaking for the progressives, did not use the word score. We intentionally didn't use that word. We said we want to get to a good place on projections coming from CBO if they did not complete the score. So I think we'll get the projection that we need at least by this time tomorrow, and I expect for us to vote on it Friday.
Okay, so this week, and then at this point, from what you understand about the reluctant senators who have not been on board with this at the level of spending, what's your sense of whether a compromise can be reached on this?
Well, you know, I never tried to figure the Senate out. You know, when you got rules that allow one person to gum up the works, any one senator can gum it up. So I don't exactly know how to deal with that. Because if you satisfy Joe Manchin over here, Christian Sinema may have another problem. And there are others that may have other problems. So I don't know what they're going to do there. So what I want to do is pass this bill out of the House this week and pray that the Senate will find enough votes to do something about those mothers who want to go back to work, but they don't have childcare for their children. That's in Build Back Better. Those people who want health care and don't have it, that's in Build Back Better. Those people, those Black farmers, for instance, who never got their money and they won the lawsuit in the Pickford case, that's in Build Back Better. I could go through issue after issue in Build Back Better, and you will find programs that deal with the everyday lives of our people. And Joe Biden calls it human infrastructure. And so we need to pass that bill.
Well, and what is your sense of Senators Sinema and Manchin? Do you feel that they've been consistent in their concerns about the bill? And do you find their perspective on this understandable to you?
No, I don't. I do not find it understandable. I've talked to, I had not talked extensively, though we sat next to each other at the signing on Monday. Sinema and I sat next to each other and we chatted. We knew each other very well when she was in the House. Went out and campaigned with her when she first ran out there in Arizona. So I got to know her pretty well. I do not understand their position on the filibuster, because for you to tell me that the filibuster is critical to maintaining a democracy, I don't see that. I don't see that. I know the history of the filibuster. I know what it was used for. And just to be sure, the first time the filibuster became real to me is when it was used by John C. Calhoun back around the 1830s or 1840s. He wasn't arguing about race at that time. He was arguing about a national bank. John C. Calhoun did not want a national bank. He wanted every state to have his own bank. And we now know how silly that was. So the filibuster had been used to advance silly stuff. Strom Thurmond used it, and others, to fight civil rights. To me, that's silly. So the filibuster, to me, is not critical to maintaining the democracy. It is only there to help people gum up the works if they don't want to see significant progress being made. So I do not understand that.
The president is dealing, of course, with inflation that is the highest we've seen in 3 decades, and gasoline prices are at historic highs as well. That typically has been a very big problem for sitting presidents at the time. As you look at the midterm elections next year, given what we're seeing with inflation and gasoline prices. Also, given the results that you were just mentioning in Virginia, what are you prepared for happening next year?
Well, I'm hoping we'll deal with the inflation thing. I think as we go into the next year's elections, with inflation being what it is today, we'll lose and lose big. No question about that. I'm hopeful that some of the experts that I've talked to, I'm hopeful they're correct about Build Back Better, because most of them are projecting that the past Build Back Better will contribute to reducing or at least containing the inflation, at least the spiral. And I've seen numbers from 600 billion to 2.2 trillion in terms of contributing to deficit reduction. Now, if all that were to take place, and at the same time, we use the strategic oil reserves, whatever else, the tools that's been used before, to go after gasoline prices, to drive those prices down. If all that were to come together, I think we'll be in a different place in time for the elections next year. But that's a lot to come together.
Well, and the challenge is that with the social services bill, so much of that, if it's passed, would come even after the election. So you'd still have a delayed effect from that. And the other issue, of course, is we're seeing the president with declining approval ratings. What do you think would turn that around?
Well, you know, about $1.75 billion in this bill for affordable housing. And affordable housing, if it's done right, will not just put people back in housing, it will create jobs. It would create a lot of movement in various marketplaces. So I think there's just a bunch of stuff in the Build Back Better that will affect people almost immediately. So I know that some of this will come after the next election. And that's why we have a real problem. We didn't use the word score when we were doing the CBO stuff, because we know how they do these things, and they score them in such a way that not only would not get to us on time, but sometimes these things play out for 3 or 4 years to meet the score as it relates to CBO. So you're right that some of these things won't happen, but a lot of them will happen immediately. One being the child tax credit. Remember the child tax credit that all the experts said lift half of the children who were living in poverty, lift them out of poverty almost immediately. That expires on December 31st. So are we going to sit here and say, we're not going to pass Build Back Better? As Joe Manchin says, we ought to wait till next year, take a look at this. Every one of those children go back into poverty the morning of January 1, if we don't pass Build Back Better. So come on.
Congressman, I wanted to ask you about the UN climate conference that ended last week in Glasgow. There were some agreements that came out of that controlling various greenhouse gases. But for those who are most activist on the issue of global warming, expressions of disappointment about what was achieved by the major countries in the world. How do you see it, and what more do you think Congress can do toward controlling greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, you know, I'm an advocate of what I call the smorgasbord effect when it comes to dealing with all of the contributors to this problem. Coal, to me, has to be offset with things like nuclear. I'm a pro-nuclear guy. I'm one of the Democrats, we're not the only one that they won't talk about it. I just say what I am. I live in a state that 53% of our energy comes from nuclear. And when I used to talk to Barack Obama, he had a position on that I told him he ought to look at the percentage of energy in Illinois that come from nuclear. So I have a smorgasbord approach to this, all of the above. So I want to see everybody get into this game. And I know that the big problem at the conference had to do with dealing with coal and fossil fuels. So I know that it's a problem. I don't know that I can solve the problem, but I know that we've got to solve the problem. Well, I feel very strongly that the scientists are right on this. I live in South Carolina. I know what the weather conditions are, and I know there's some strange things happening. And they tell me it's because of climate change.
Congressman, what about voting back to the election next year? We have Republican-controlled legislators which have passed a number of bills that have curtailed certain aspects of voting. If that is upheld, if courts don't strike those down in any way, are there ways in which the effects of those laws can be mitigated by people working in those states to try and boost turnout of people who are typically underrepresented at the polls?
Absolutely not. And I would wish people who advocate that position will stop it. I don't care how many people you turn out at the polls. If you're passing legislation that allows you to set up a committee to nullify the results of an election if you don't like the outcome, and that's what they're doing down in Georgia. That's what they're proposing down in Texas. Nullification and interposition were words that dripped from the lips of Martin Luther King Jr. at his big I Have a Dream march. Everybody keeps talking about I have a dream as being the big deal. The dream was not the big deal. The dream was what he said at the end of that speech when he says, I'm going back to the South, where these governors have the words of interposition and nullification dripping from their lips. Well, they ain't talking about it now, they're just doing it. What they're doing will nullify the vote. So you can turn out as big a vote as you want. 100% of all the eligibles can go vote. And if these laws stay on the books, it can be nullified by the process that's been put in place. America is at crossroads.
Right, let's go to members of our viewing audience with their questions, Congressman. Let's see. Sue asks, what can Democrats do to attract more young people and voters of color? Should they have a Sister Souljah-like moment about wokeness?
Well, you know, this wokeness stuff, I never understood it. I still don't understand it. I don't know what all that means. I think we build up these derogatory terms, you know, like wokeness over here, you know, defund the police over there. These things were used back in the 60s. John Lewis and I used to talk about this all the time. We were very close friends. We met as 19-year-old college students. We were the founding members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We both married professional librarians, and they became fast friends. I'm the only one of the four that's still around. And I'm not going to ever break trust with the bond that exists between us. And so I just want people to understand that this country must stop demonizing people. You know, we just take terms and turn them around. I don't know what this stuff is. We just heard this critical race theory. Nobody's ever taught critical race theory to a second grader, not even a 10th grader. And I used to teach the 10th grade. And this whole thing is to take a theory out of a college textbook and tend to demonize candidates. We just lost 4 African Americans in Virginia lost re-election over this stuff. So they're just people using terms, words, and phrases to misrepresent. And that's why Jamie Harrison lost last year. I don't care what anybody says, I was there. defund the police, destroyed his candidacy.
But that term came, if I'm not mistaken, from leaders of the Black Lives Movement who wanted to see law enforcement defunded and those funds invested in social programs, which would, in their view, reduce crime and would allow for a different response than an armed law enforcement response to calls that come to police. So, I mean, that's my understanding where that term originated. How much damage do you think that term has done?
Remember, burn, baby, burn came from Black folks. Stokely Carmichael and Rap Brown, burn, baby, burn came from Black folks. It doesn't make it right just because it came from Black folks. Defund the police, yes, it came from Black folks. And John Lewis and I spoke out forcefully against using those kinds of terms. And it's still true today. So yes, I'm not saying it didn't come from Black folks. I'm telling you it's bad. It was the wrong thing to do.
Do you think that the progressive wing of the party has done overall damage to the party with some of its initiatives and that it's pulled the Democratic Party too far to the left?
No, I don't. I think that some, we can't use a broad brush here. One of the things I've been saying last week is there's a lot of overlapping in these caucuses. Let's take, for instance, the Black caucus and the Blue Dogs. Everybody knows that the Blue Dogs caucus is a very conservative Democrat. Sanford Bishop, one of my best friends, is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, and he's a Blue Dog. David Scott is a Blue Dog. They don't agree 100% with what the Blue Dogs do, and they don't believe 100% what the Black caucus does. But they are members of both groups. There's these overlaps here. The Congressional Black Caucus supported my position on how to get to common ground on this whole issue last week with the vote. The progressives had a different position. And then we had to get people to understand there's a whole lot of overlapping. Maxine Waters is a progressive, but she's also a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. And she was proposing the Congressional Black Caucus position, which was not exactly what the Progressive Caucus position. So I don't paint them with a broad brush like this, saying they had pulled us too far to the right. No, there's too much overlapping in this. And I'm not a member. The only thing I'm a member of is the Congressional Black Caucus. I have not joined anything else, and I'm trying to figure out why I'm a member of the Congressional Black Caucus.
I wanted to ask you about COVID-19 because you're chairing the House Select Subcommittee looking at COVID-19 and particularly how the US government responded to the early days of the pandemic. Just briefly, what has the subcommittee learned to this point?
We've learned a lot. There was so much wrong. The former president took this country to a bad place. There's more waste, fraud in all capital letters, and abuse in those programs. And it's coming out every day. We just had a hearing today on misinformation. We've had hearings on what was done by a lot of people, misusing the money. We've recovered some, and we are working on recovering some more. We have to go to court on with a lot of these things. I just issued subpoenas, I think on Monday. So I don't hold press conferences every time I do something. I've just never done that. I ran a state agency in South Carolina for almost 18 years, doing investigations in unfair treatment. And people used to ask me all the time, you need to go public, have a press conference, so it might discourage other people. No, I don't do that. So I've not had press conferences about all this. we do send letters. The letters sometimes get out to the public and we respond to them. And sometimes we release the letter to the public. But I don't make it a point to stand up in front of a camera to announce every time we've done something. But we're doing a lot. And I think that the public would be satisfied.
Timothy asks, what do you think will be the impact of the Select Committee looking at the January 6th insurrection?
Well, it all depends on whether or not they get the kind of support from the Justice Department I think they deserve to get. Now, everybody was sitting on pins and needles, waiting to see what the Attorney General was going to do with Bannon. He's done. Finally, what we think he should have done earlier. There'll be some other Bannons that he will have to deal with. And there will be some others, Bennett Thompson has told me there'll be some more subpoenas going out this week. So it's going to be a big, big deal. I think that overall, if all of the judicial systems hold as it did during Watergate, I think this committee will preserve this democracy. Now, someone wrote an op-ed piece, I can't remember now who it was. I glanced through it this morning. I was reading everything else that I could get my hands on, trying to prepare for my meeting. But someone predicted that if things stay the way they are, Democrats will lose next year and in 2024. And the results will be, we will lose our democracy. Now, I didn't say that. That was written by somebody much smarter than me. But that's what I read this morning. If Democrats lose next year and in 2024, we will lose this democracy.
Bob asks, our democracy seems broken. What are your remedies aside from Democrats winning elections?
I think people need to put the country above self. The country needs to be put above self. The Republican Party will not put the country above their partisan politics. I mean, how do your 13 members that decide they're going to vote for a bill that almost 80% of the American people, who I saw a recent poll saying it was over 60%, but they were at one point it was nearly 80% of the American people said they are for this infrastructure bill. We passed it. 13 Republicans voted for it. And now the leadership of the Republican Party said, we are looking at stripping them of their authority that we gave them as Republicans because they voted for the bill. Now, is that putting country above self? That is the ultimate in partisan politics. That's what's wrong with this country. And if people keep electing these people, how do you keep electing a guy like Gozar? Come on. He showed us who he was years ago.
MPS, what specifically would you recommend to prevent voter suppression bills from becoming law in states around the country?
Well, the first thing we need to do is reform the filibuster. And we need to look, again, I've studied this. I've studied the Federalist Papers. Alexander Hamilton made it very clear. I forgot the number now. Maybe 4, I forgot the number. What the role is of the federal government when it comes to these elections. And for some reason, we have been allowing these states and their laws to reign supreme. We have got to exert the federal government into this as we are supposed to. No state has a right to overturn a congressional election. And no state has the right to discriminate at the legislative level. The 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments are still there. They're still there. And the 14th Amendment, most especially. Now, the 13th freed the slaves and the 15th gave slaves the right to vote. But the 14th Amendment, equal protection of the law, still there.
Republicans have said that Democrats' legislative efforts on elections have been a move to try and federalize them, make elections essentially controlled by the federal government and not allowing states latitude in how they conduct their elections. What's your response to that claim?
That's the way it should be. Look at the Federalist Papers. Look at the Constitution. That's where it is. We should be one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So you think there should not be individual differences between states on when their polls are open, what they accept for mail-in ballots, how they register voters, that all should be standardized across the board?
What you're saying now is totally different from what your question was. You're talking about the process now. I'm talking about the substance. Now, yeah, some people, I like mail-in ballots, and I think they ought to be. Colorado has shown us that it works, and it can work very, very well. I've never seen any accusations up in Colorado about fraud and abuse. And mail-in ballots were great for Republicans until Donald Trump said they were bad. Republicans loved that. They fell in love with mail-in ballots a long time before Democrats did. But then Trump comes along and says that ain't right. So then now they decided that there's something wrong with it.
Congressman, we've had a couple of people ask, including Hazel and Deanne, will there be immigration reform?
I certainly hope so. That's another thing we can't seem to get through. We've done it in the House how many times? Immigration reform needs to take place. And now we're at a point where we cannot, the Democrats will do it, but we cannot get beyond the filibuster. And we can, we have to abide by the Senate parliamentarian that says, we can't do reconciliation because that has been determined to violate the Byrd rule. That is the process of immigration. So I would hope so. I think that the only way we're going to get immigration done is to give us 60 votes and give Democrats 60 votes in the Senate. Immigration will get done overnight.
So just to clarify, you favor doing away with the filibuster in total?
No, I've always called for the filibuster being modified and not to the point that it won't be applied to constitutional issues. Now, the filibuster, I can understand a filibuster. If I got an issue on the floor trying to get something done in my state or my district, and you oppose it, and you need time to to educate the rest of the body on your proposal, the filibuster has a role in that instance. But when you talk about voting rights, and you got one person that from whatever state that would not like to see Black and brown people have the vote, you let that one person keep Black and brown people from having a vote. That's wrong. That's wrong.
Congressman, we need to wrap up, and I want to give you a chance to give just a very brief thought looking forward. There are people who are feeling a sense of despair about where we are as a country and where we are governmentally. But obviously, you're very invested in this because you've spent decades serving in the House of Representatives. So when you get up in the morning and you get set to make your appearance in the halls of Congress, what is it that is animating for you and gives you a sense of hopefulness about our future?
Well, when I was a student in college, I studied Alexis de Tocqueville. Alexis de Tocqueville came to this country to study our penal system. And while here, de Tocqueville said he saw something magical about this country. Came here from France around in the 1830s. And he set out to find out what that magic was. And you look at his 2-volume work, Democracy in America, de Tocqueville came to this conclusion: America's greatness is not that it is more enlightened than any other nation, but rather because it has always been able to repair its faults. I think about that. I think about the greatness of this country when I get up every morning. And I'll do what I can to make sure that Alexis de Tocqueville, remember I said he wrote that back in the 1830s, slavery was still running rampant in this country. And Abraham Lincoln, with the Emancipation Proclamation, repaired a fault. The Supreme Court in 1954 repaired a fault. Congress in the 1960s, under Lyndon Johnson, repaired some faults. I get up every day asking myself, is this the day that we will do what is necessary to repair some faults? That's what keeps me going.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate the generosity of your time and spending this hour with us with viewers from across the United States. Thank you, sir, very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
We appreciate it. And in closing, let me just remind you, wherever you're watching, we will be off next week because of Thanksgiving week. However, the program the week following is going to be a don't miss with the LA Times' Pat Morrison and with Max Boot, who's op-ed columnist for the Washington Post. Our series, America at a Crossroads, resumes 2 weeks from tonight on Wednesday, December 1st at 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. I also want to remind you that you can financially support these important programs that are collaboration of 2 nonprofit organizations with the assistance of other nonprofit groups, but they are principally Jews United for Democracy and Justice. You can visit their website as well as Community Advocates, Inc., and make contributions to support these important programs from which I know all of us learn so very much. Thank you for joining us. We wish you a very safe, a very fulfilling, and a very thankful Thanksgiving, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Good night.